joining. My name is Tracy Cook. I'm the online media manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled The Business Analyst and Behavioral Analytics. Today's featured speaker is Steve Blaise, PMI, PBA, and is an author, consultant, teacher, and coach who has over 53 years experience in information technologies, working as a programmer, project manager, business analyst, system analyst, general manager, and tester. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We're going to talk about behavior and particularly how to analyze behavior. Now, behavioral analytics is a kind of a fairly recent advancement in business analytics, and we've been talking about various forms of business analytics in these webinars in the past. This is a new wrinkle, and we'll talk about the variations of that wrinkle. And what happens is that we're looking for insights, as we are with all analytical stuff and all of our descriptive analytics and our predictive analytics and so forth. The key element there is to get insights. What don't we know? What are things that we can find out and so forth that are existing in the data? In this case, we're looking for a different kind of data. In this case, we're looking at the behavior of consumers, of employees, of people in general. And primarily, the focus right now of business analytics is on e-commerce platforms and online games, web and mobile applications, and to a degree, the Internet of Things. Now, the key element that allows us to do this is the rapid increase in the volume of raw event data that is generated by all of the digital world out there, everything that's going on. And we're now gathering information and data that goes beyond the typical analytical stuff we've been talking about, like demographic data, psychographic data, and that type of data. All of the traditional metrics that tell us what kind of people took what actions in the past. We're now talking about behavioral analytics, which focuses on understanding why they did what they did, and as a result, what might they do next. Now, the technologies that we're talking about, all of the underpinning that have been going on, we're almost past the state of emerging technologies nowadays. They all kind of have something to do with the human brain. And that makes sense, since we're kind of learning more about the human brain as we go along, and as we learn about it, we start to replicate it, as we have done with quite a few other things and replicating things that we know about. Let's take a look at some of those. Big data, for example, is a technology that replicates the human capacity for retaining billions of pieces of information. And of course you say, wait, Steve, hold on, billions of pieces of information. I can't even remember where I put my keys or what I was going to do in another hour. How can I have billions of pieces of information? Well, it's not just that we have this massive amount of storage, but we also have the ability to access that storage. That's not just having it is really, who cares? What can I do with it? And we're able to get this massive amount. Now, as it is, even with big data and the massive amounts of data we have, we're still kind of getting to the ability of any human brain to retain all of these facts. But we're getting there because of the reduction in cost of the information storage and in the physical data storage footprint. It doesn't take, it's not very big. You got a small amount. Your watch has gigabytes of data on it and so forth. But then you have the speed, and the speeds are increasing, the Moore's law, so that we can access data almost as fast as we can get it with our own brains. And that's big data replicating our ability to store data up there in the frontal cortex and the hypothalamus. Then we have data mining. Now you say, well, wait, hold on. Data mining, that doesn't sound like something we do. I mean, human beings don't do data mining. Well, that's because we don't really consider that searching for the right word or trying to figure out that actor who starred in that other movie or even the name of the familiar face right in front of us. We don't consider that mining, but for all intents and purposes, it is. See, we're not going to, at this point, say that data mining is simply a matter of memory access and association, but it is. The process of data mining in computers is very similar to how we think and use our memories. See, we remember things because something else that is happening, and that is associated with something else. This is a associative memory. You probably have had it today. You hear a particular song and you get a nostalgic memory comes to mind, or you hear a name and that reminds you of some other name. Or somebody says, hey, we've got to go to lunch, and remember that, oh my goodness, I was supposed to meet somebody for lunch. This is associative memory. And associative memory is one of the basic operations in data mining. Now, we also have what we call cluster memory, which we can remember groups and categorize and cluster things together, like groups of colors on an easel that represent a painting, groups of our neighbors, a city, and so forth. We tend to think of things that way to make sense out of them. Similarly, data mining clusters data using mathematical algorithms. Oh, and we're constantly identifying things around us, solving problems and so forth by simple pattern recognition. And data mining algorithms are really good at recognizing patterns, especially when you couple that with machine learning. So what's the difference between data mining and what we do? We have only the data that we know about in our brain, the data we have been exposed to, and that we can dredge up into our memory to develop those clusters and associations and to devise patterns. Clearly, you know, our brains, depending on what theory of memory you think about, we could possibly in our brains have every single image that we've ever seen up there in this attic of our brain there at the top of our head. Old Sherlock Holmes used to tell Watson that he had to clear out things. When Watson informed him that the Earth went around the sun, he said, I didn't know that, and I'm now going to forget it, because if I try to remember that, it's going to wipe out space that I could be putting in something that's valuable for crime solving, like a different type of ash, for example. He believed that the mind was like some big attic that only had limited space. And in order to make room for a new thing, you had to get rid of an old thing. Another theory is it's unlimited. So, but in reality, you can't remember everything you ever did and put it all together. The data mining has all the data in the world and a way of qualifying that data to give you quality in the data. And of course, data mining can do a significantly better job than we can as human beings. Now, from this data mining process, we have descriptive analytics, which describe what's going on now or what has gone on in the immediate past. We have predictive analytics, which describe potential outcomes in the future based on what is going on now and what has gone on in the past. The possibilities of something will happen, not an actual prediction. They're not going to come out and say, this is definitely going to happen. What they're saying is there's an 80% chance that this will happen. And we have prescriptive analytics, recommending various different actions to take to prevent a bad thing from happening or to influence a good thing to actually happen. And we have diagnostic analytics, which can answer the question, why did this happen in the first place? Now, that's cool, and that kind of covers the brain, but you know, we have 5 senses that are constantly streaming data into our brains. So how would we replicate those five senses? For example, while you are sitting there listening to my voice and potentially looking at the screen, if you're not looking at something else, your eyes are also taking in the rest of the room or wherever you happen to be seated now. And you are hearing ambient noise. If I asked you to notice right now what other noises or voices are going on, you would then pick up the noises that you might not be aware of because you're focused on my voice. You have earphones on, perhaps. Now, this is the result of the brain's capacity to filter the inputs. Have you ever gone to a party and just hanging around, there's all this noise, maybe 30, 40, 50 people in one room, all talking at the same time and carrying on. And if somebody happens to mention your name to somebody else, it's not, your first name, could be any number of first names. Your name is, Brad, and somebody's talking about the latest Brad Pitt movie. You will hear the word Brad. Why? Because your brain is filtered to hear Brad. It has its whole life. So the same thing, you don't hear what everybody else is saying, but you will, out of all that ambient noise, pick up Brad. This is that capacity to filter the inputs in and out. You are still hearing, seeing, smelling, feeling, and tasting things, but the brain is only acknowledging certain of these senses. And of course, that's what it needs to make the immediate decisions, getting rid of the stuff that might be effective and keep you from making the right decision. So how do we replicate that in a computer environment? Well, we have what is called the Internet of Things, a series of connected sensors and devices which continually stream data from the source back to the big data repository, where then it can be processed through data mining and various analytics that we just talked about. Now, the devices on these Internet of Things allows the computer to see, hear, to an extent, smell, feel, and even taste and touch. For example, there are computers with machine learning algorithms that are used to judge the quality of wines in a wine competition and are equal, or if not better, than the human enophiles that are there judging the wine. Pretty cool. Consider also the ability of using the Internet of Things, a computer to tell you how soft a mattress is and what it takes to make it softer or harder. And in fact, recommend to you what softness it should have. Well, that's cool, but this all deals with facts, data, static information, dead information, information that has already happened. What is missing at this point in our development of the brain's capacity is the limbic system, the amygdala, the feelings, how people feel about things, their emotions, not just their sense of touch, but what they do, the actions that they take and why they do that. Knowing that somebody bought something online is one thing. Can we predict that that person will buy that thing again? If it's a gift for someone and it's expensive and unique, we might say probably not. But how would we know that? What would we recommend? Other than that, it's difficult to say what they might buy next. What gifts are they going to buy during the holidays and so forth? Consider being able to track the purchases, actions, and activities prior to making the purchase. If we can determine that those actions and activities lead consistently to making a specific purchase, we may be able to influence those actions and activities to direct that purchaser to make another similar purchase. We might change our advertising, change our market schemes to match or enhance their behavior. And this is behavioral analytics. Now, one aspect of behavioral analytics you've probably already been exposed to if you've been on Netflix, Amazon. I'll give you an example. For years, after buying first reading books, Goodnight Moon and that type of thing for my grandchildren who were all, 0, 1, 2 years old. For years after that, I got a recommendation from Amazon saying, buy more of these kinds of books. All my grandchildren have long outgrown that. They're all in grade and school and high school and graduated from college and so forth. I'm not going to buy them Goodnight Moon, but Amazon kept putting that on their list. Here's some recommendations. Why? Because I bought that. Static, dead data. No reference to what is going on now. Now, Amazon uses more behavioral analytics and is able to distinguish when I buy something for myself so that they can recommend another similar item, and when I buy things for other people that aren't clearly not for me, and knows when I buy things that might be bought again and again. Gee, he bought this kind of coffee every 3 months. I think I'm going to have Alexa remind him that it's time to buy another coffee in case he forgot. This is using behavioral analytics, and this is called recommendation analytics. Similarly, we get blog posts and Facebook reactions and Twitter comments about our products, but we may not be able to tell whether those postings are sarcastic, extremely positive, momentarily emotional reactions that kind of don't reflect a long-term consideration, or whatever. It's just words that are posted. Sentiment analytics, a form of behavioral analytics, can be used to analyze the words and determine what the person's actual sentiment is. Additionally, part of behavioral analytics is the determination of someone's feelings while they are taking a particular action by the appearance of their facial expressions, body language, voice tone, and so forth. Now, all of these behavioral and general behavioral analytics, we'll see here in a minute, are all fairly new, but still are being used. Underlying this all is, of course, your machine learning, your deep learning, because as human beings, what puts more stuff into our brain? We learn about it. How do we know not to touch the hot stove? Because we learn not to touch the hot stove by probably touching it. What do we know about? How do we know to wear rain gear when it's dark, cloudy, and pouring? Because we've been through it. We learn. We try something, fail, and then don't do it again. Try something and like it and do it again. So our memories and our associative actions and behaviors are governed by those past lessons that we learned. The algorithms which govern the recommendations or the pronouncements are also governed by learning through machine learning. And that tells the system, the algorithm, that the recommendation is good or bad. They make a recommendation, there's no response to that recommendation. 100,000 recommendations are made and nobody responds to it. I learned that we're not going to make that recommendation again. If based on the profile of the person I made a recommendation to, they bought that thing I recommended, I'm going to recommend it to others who have that same profile. Part of recommendation analytics you may have seen is, hey, you bought this, your friends are also buying this. Oh, and by the way, when people bought this, they typically also bought this. Extremely successful. Well, let's take a moment here and take a look at this sentiment analysis, because this is kind of fun stuff. In fact, this whole behavioral analytics is all fun because of its newness, the potential, the possibility. So here's sentiment analysis. Much of sentiment analytics today is based on forensic linguistics, which is the examination of both your written and verbal words, how they are juxtaposed, the phraseology, the specific words used, and so forth. Perhaps the most well-known example of this might be the effort outside of fiction and TV shows and movies, the examination of the plays written by Shakespeare to determine whether this fellow Shakespeare actually wrote the plays attributed to Shakespeare, or was it somebody else? And they examined the recurrence of phrases and words and patterns throughout all of Shakespeare's plays, all of his sonnets, all of his writings, to see that, does he write this way when he's not writing a play? Because it should kind of look the same, but maybe somebody else wrote it, like Francis Bacon. And by looking at Francis Bacon's writing, we say, hey, this is very similar to Shakespeare, and maybe Francis Bacon wrote all of Shakespeare's stuff. Yeah, we don't know. The argument will go on for another 100 years, 1,000 years probably. By using sentiment analytics on social media posts, blogs, other writings, responses, and so forth, the concept is that we can determine whether a person is angry or happy based on how they phrase their posting. And you say, well, that's cool, but how would that affect me? Okay, well, I'll take your challenge. Consider this: the dreaded meeting. Consider that you are at a meeting, in a meeting room, and everybody is sitting around the table. Of course, you may not have that option today under these current pandemic circumstances, but maybe you can remember back that far, go back in time to that wonderful year, 2019, where you were actually in those wonderful meetings. And you're seeing everybody, you're sitting around a table. There you are, right there. Pick one of those people there. You are one of them sitting there. And you're able to witness the people's body language. You note their tone of voice. You can pick up sarcasm, for example. You see their facial expressions that go along with their comments. And you can tell, okay, he's being sarcastic because his eyebrow went up and he's got a little glint in his eye. He's just being sarcastic. Or she's trying to make a joke out of that and because she's smiling. And the body expression, you can see somebody tensing up. Oh, he's getting a little upset about this particular topic of conversation. And not only that, but you can see what everybody else is doing as well. The facial expressions and the body language of the people who are listening to what somebody said or listening to what you say. And you will draw conclusions that will be reasonably accurate because we have a little nodule up in the right hemisphere of the frontal cortex that has a long Greek name I'm not even going to attempt, much less remember it. Even if I remembered it, I wouldn't try to say it. But it's very small, and its sole purpose is to recognize the facial and body language of another person that you're looking at. And that expands or contracts depending on how much time you spend with other people. So you have something in your brain designed to look at these people sitting there. Well, that's cool, and it might make my next meeting a little more interesting as I look around the room. But what about today? We have virtual meetings, no body language. The voice is disconnected, sometimes physically disconnected. You hear the voice and then you see the mouth go, depending on the speed of your computer and connection. So there you are, there's your people. Consider that you are able to understand what the feelings of each person, because if you look at that and you look at your next Zoom meeting, keep in mind that the facial expressions are constrained and they're generally distorted by the compression and uncompression of the data. What you're hearing right now from me has been digitized. You're not hearing an analog. I can hear analog because it's coming out of my mouth, but it's going through the computers here, through the network lines. And in order to do that with a reasonable amount of speed, they're going to compress it. And when they do, they cut off the high and low frequencies from the analog signal. We didn't think that meant much when we first started doing it. Actually, I was working on this type of thing back in 1998, the compression algorithms. We didn't think it did much because we can't hear the high and low frequencies anyway. You hear dog whistles that you can't hear, but dogs can hear because they're above the high frequencies that our ears can pick up. turns out that human beings can actually pick it up in a sense. They can't hear it, but they can sense it. An example, sarcasm has a sense up in the upper registers, and if you cut out those registers to compress and then decompress it, because it doesn't come back, it's what's called lossy algorithm. We don't return that what we lost, we just took it out because, hey, you can't hear it anyway. So it'll make it go faster. But it turns out that's how we tell sarcasm and other emotions. We can sense it from the sound. So right now, if I were being sarcastic, you might not be able to tell. And you're sitting there and someone's being sarcastic and maybe looking away so you can't catch the twinkle in their eye, and you might react incorrectly. All of this is going on in the meeting. So the meetings are stilted, and we get that Zoom problems that we have, where we get tired and wiped out from Zoom because our brain is trying to figure out what's going on as it would in a real meeting, because it's looking at the person, and your brains cannot tell whether the person's live or it's a picture. Interesting. Now, at some time in the future, we're not too far away today, here in 2021, we will be in a Zoom meeting, and the sentiment analytics and behavioral analytics will be able to identify through voice, meaning the analog voice it hears originally, and the limited body language at the source, what the person is feeling. One person might be happy and you can't really tell. Another person might be in agreement with you, but has made no physical indication of that. No nodding of head, has not verbally said, I agree with you. Somebody else might be, angry or frustrated. We may not at some point be able to distinguish anger from frustration. And somebody else that you're thinking is completely disinterested in you and possibly even angry about what you're saying, in reality is simply hungry. And it would be nice to have a highlight of a certain color on that box where the person is sitting, kind of highlights in red saying, this person is in disagreement with you. They're getting angry. Give you a chance, because you could tell if you were sitting across from them at the conference table, you could tell they're getting angry, unless you're a sociopath. So this will then give us a feeling for that. Now, Microsoft's got some kind of new gimmick where they actually use avatars to show the people around the table. I'm not sure whether they're going to include sentiment analytics there as well. So we're talking about behavior analytics. And the question is, what constitutes behavior? Well, what is behavior? If I'm going to analyze it, I got to know what it is. The behavior is the way in which one acts or conducts oneself, especially toward others, or acts in response to a particular situation or stimulus. That's the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, behavior exists over time. One action or activity may not constitute behavior, or at least behavior that we can analyze. It takes observations of behavior over time, movement, if you will, to form patterns in order for behavioral analytics to work, in order for us to even understand that behavior. A frown on a face does not necessarily indicate a behavioral reaction. When it happens again, then we can start putting things together and modify our behavior in reaction to it. We certainly also don't act the same way all the time. Behavior changes over time. We certainly don't act the same way today as we did when we were 6 years old or as a teenager. And since there may be a great number of you who are in your 20s, I will say that I don't act the same way I did when I was in my 20s, 50 years ago. One of the problems working with behavior is that most interpretations or analysis of behavior is done after the fact. People have done something right or wrong, and then we make a judgment on it or an analysis of it. We can only understand it in retrospect, working backwards from the results and examine the actions. Then we are able to identify a pattern in the behavior. We want them to do it again. What caused them to do it in the first place? So what can we do to make them do it again? We don't want them to do it again. What can we do to make them stop? And more importantly, how can we know they're about to do it again? For example, we can expect people to be sad when a loved one dies. However, sadness is not always the reaction everybody has, and sadness may not be evident in the normal behavioral actions. And people display sadness in a variety of ways. In some cases, it takes a pattern to designate that this is sadness. And then, of course, there's another factor involved with behavior, and that is that people tend to mask their behavior and their feelings so that you're not really sure of their actual reactions. And of course, in a digitized world, this becomes somewhat easier, especially since we don't have to put our face up there. We can put an avatar or a big blank screen with just our name on it. I ain't going to show you my face, so try to figure out my behavior from that. We have all seen people's behavior we do not understand, or that does not match what we expected. Much of that is because we interpret someone else's behavior based on our own. If we understand that something is humorous, we assume that someone else who does not laugh as we are laughing just simply has no sense of humor, or they're distracted, or they weren't listening, or they're just flat out stupid and don't get the joke. This is called the fundamental attribution error. We assign people's intent based on their behavior, while we assign our behavior based on our intent. And of course, this tends to increase miscommunication and misunderstanding. Fortunately, computers do not have intent, and computers do not have behavior, at least as we know it. And at least today, who knows, when Terminator comes around, we may have a whole bunch of behavior that we just didn't expect. As such, they cannot fall prey to the confirmation bias, to the association bias, to the fundamental attribution error, to the recency or heuristic. They just simply don't. We do, and this is all stuff that's been found since Tversky and Kahneman started working on behavioral economics back in the 1940s. So this is behavior. What would behavioral analytics be? Behavioral analytics examines the whats and hows of customer behavioral data and other behavioral data, employee behavioral data as well, to inform the whys of why they are doing things. This can include tracking page views, email signups, or other important actions like registrations. Behavioral analytics is a tool that reveals the actions users take within or while using a digital product. It organizes raw data events, such as clicks, into a timeline of each user's behavior. Remember I said that this is a pattern of behavior. It's not one thing taken in isolation as much of the other analytics is. Now this pathway, this path that people take, whether it's externally going to a store, becoming involved with a stock on the stock market, or buying something from Amazon. This is called a user journey. User experience teams and design thinking teams use behavioral analytics and the user journey to determine what users like and don't like, and by inference, what adjustments can make the product more valuable. Now, the goal of behavioral analytics is pretty much the same as the goal for all other data analytics processes. Gain actionable insight. The difference is with predictive and descriptive analytics, they depend entirely on massive amounts of data that have already been collected and just sit there waiting for analysis. Behavioral analytics uses data as we are doing it, defining how they are going to interact as they are doing it, as they are interacting, to gain better and more accurate insights to marketing and sales purposes and security. In other words, understanding not just what they do, but why they do it, and at the individual level. Behavioral analytics is particularly effective in highlighting insights for marketing and sales for such targets as long tail marketing and the holy grail of the market of one. You get advertisements and you are the only one that gets that particular advertising for that particular product, because based on your behavior and all the information we have about you at this point in time, this particular day of this particular month, because you are in that particular place, this is what you want. Now, this is not all that new. I was in meetings at General Motors back at the turn of the century when they were introducing OnStar. And this thing in the, right now they all have it where you can, well, you got the Google Siri and all that. You can talk to people in the car, and the idea then was that if you have an accident or you have a car problem, it'll automatically get your repair shop and all that. Well, Jim Noble, who was a vice president at the time of General Motors, said, this is what we have. We're no longer a car company, we're an information company. Because imagine this, you're driving down the road, a road you've never been down before, and it's maybe in the evening, and you're getting low on gas. The voice comes on and says, Steve, I noticed that you're getting low on gas. The algorithm knows that my favorite gas is Shell gasoline. And she says, there's a Shell station coming up here at about 4 miles ahead on the left. So obviously I'm probably going to, and it's open, and I'm going to probably pull in and get the gas because I'm low on gas. As I'm doing so, the algorithm knows that I like coffee and let's say potato chips. What do you call the salt and vinegar? We'll say potato chips. And the voice says, incidentally, they're having a sale on coffee and on potato chips. The salt and vinegar potato chips are such and such. And obviously, this information is easy to pull out of the computers from the gas station that I'm going to. What is the chance that I'm going to buy it? A lot better than if you're sitting there watching the Super Bowl or some other event on television and a commercial comes on for salt and vinegar potato chips, and you love salt and vinegar potato chips. Are you going to get up, leave the living room, get in your car, drive down to the store, buy the potato chips and come back? No. If you do buy potato chips at some point, did you buy them because of that ad? But if I buy potato chips at that gas station at that time, it's strictly and 100% because of that ad. And that is valuable to any marketing as you can possibly imagine here. Well, let's take this one step further here and compare these three. Let's compare predictive analytics, descriptive analytics, and behavioral analytics, and let's use new features. You've got products, and products come out with new features. You've all got cell phones, and every once in a while they come out with new features for the cell phone, and you decide whether you're going to get them, or you hear about new apps to add to your phone. Okay, and what we're looking at is the conversion time. Now we have two things here: conversion time and conversion rate. Conversion rate is the number of people who actually buy the feature, and the conversion time is the time it takes for someone to purchase those features. This is also important because companies may introduce several new features at a time or in close succession. So we're going to use predictive analytics. This can predict the relative volume of sales of new features and the relative conversion rate. For example, most people will add this new feature within 30 days of introduction. How do we know? Well, because in the past, a similar feature had that, and we can do the algorithm and the hyperbole, and there it is. And then we also can determine that if they have not added the new feature within 30 days of introduction, the likelihood of them actually doing it is near zero. That's pretty cool, and we're doing that now. Descriptive analytics will provide the statistical results of the actual sales of those features. However, neither of these analytical techniques will produce a reason why a particular feature was adopted quickly, adopted over time, or not at all. The marketers and business analysts are left with trying to come up with a reason why a feature didn't sell, or why it took longer to mature, or why it actually took off right away as compared to the others that didn't. In behavioral analytics, by collecting and analyzing behavior, customers' interactions leading up to the purchase of the feature or the failure to purchase, behavioral analytics can more accurately provide the reasons for adoption quickly or not at all. Now, most product marketing, business analysts, analytics teams are constantly pursuing the answer to this one question: how are customers using the product if they are using it at all? Behavioral analytics software provides concrete answers with a visual interface where teams can segment users, run reports, and deduce customers' needs and interests. It provides the actionable insights to adjust marketing programs, campaigns associated with new features, and the initial selection of the features themselves. So what constitutes behavioral data? Behavioral data is generated by or in response to a customer's engagement through their touch points. And this can include things like page views, email signups, and any kind of action. And also, at some time in the future, if we retain brick and mortar stores, be able to track people within a store to see what their journey is. What departments do they visit? What was the juxtaposition of those departments? Why did they skip everything and go straight to one place? But behavioral data can also be tied back to a single user. It's important to note that this user can be a known, registered, logged in individual, or anonymous, a guest. Either way, it can be followed. And the type of data that is typically created and stored is in the form of an event, meaning an action that was taken, and the properties that surround that event, which are metadata that describe the event. For example, an event could be a site visit, and a property of that event could be device type, so that we know how many people visited our site using a phone and how many people visited using a desktop. All of the events are associated with time. This is called raw event data and raw event time. And that's generated when the users click or swipe or navigate a site or app, pick up a product off the shelf in a Amazon Go store, leave the store. All of these are events. And we can now view the data in aggregate to understand the behaviors, which ones are most common, what are the journeys, what are the paths that they take through the store or through the website. So let's look at the process. How does it work? First, we observe. We look at what is considered to be normal human behavior patterns. And this would be defined by the culture and norms of the times based on massive amounts of people doing essentially the same thing. Not that it might be normal, and not that it might be normal 10 years from now or 10 years ago. Once we've established what's kind of normal now, we would, and this, incidentally, this is the same thing that psychologists and psychiatrists and sociologists and criminologists and behavioral psychologists, and they all do the same thing. This is we've been doing this since psychology started back in the days of Freud and Jung. This is what we consider normal, and this is not normal, so let's see why. So once we have normal, then we can look at the patterns that are there to determine whether that behavior that they're doing is outside the realm of normalcy. Are they doing something different? Are they buying something that other people aren't buying? We then prepare the observed behavior with the normal behavior to determine what those exceptions actually are. Now, note here that we're talking about exceptions and anomalies. We're not talking about something that's bad, just something that is different. Now, the reason why you don't like vanilla or chocolate ice cream when the majority of the people will opt for vanilla or chocolate ice cream, which is why all stores have vanilla and chocolate and extra vanilla and chocolate. Not many have pumpernickel ice cream or vanilla fudge, right? Now, this is not to say that it is normal to like vanilla chocolate ice cream, just you are particularly special for not doing so. And we want to know that when you come into our ice cream store, that you like pumpernickel ice cream. I'm sorry, I couldn't think of anything. Pumpernickel just came to my head here. I have no idea whether there's any such thing as pumpernickel ice cream. So you can all check in your local ice cream stores to see if they have pumpernickel ice cream, and maybe kind of like Games Store. If everybody goes down right now and asks for pumpernickel ice cream, Ben and Jerry's is bound to come up with pumpernickel ice cream within the next month. Now, after you've done these three, the final step is to analyze using pre-existing alternate behavior patterns why the exception exists. Why does that person like pumpernickel ice cream? For example, detectives model the behavior of suspects against theories of crime to determine a criminal's potential complicity in that crime. Now, the difference between human and machine behavioral analytics is not just in the volume and scope of the data that can be analyzed and the time it takes to do the analysis. It's the fact that we don't have those personalized factors, the biases. We won't tend to jump to conclusions. Remember Sherlock Holmes's admonition in The Scandal in Bohemia. It is a capital crime to come to a conclusion before one has all the data. One tends to twist the data to fit the conclusion rather than come up with a conclusion. And behavioral analytics will not do that. So typically, we are in marketing and sales, and that's where the main thrusts of behavioral analytics go. So you're probably wondering, well, that's cool, Steve, and I'm a business analyst, so what does this have to do with me? How is a business analyst involved? Well, let's check all of these things that the business analyst will be involved in. We identify priority audience segments. Which segments of the audience are the most valuable to your company and your brand? Behavioral analytics takes into account people's perceptions and decision-making methods, their motivations and priorities, as well as learned habits, which are controlled unconsciously. While the business analyst is generally involved with identifying and segmenting user populations within the organization, and you are doing this now to improve the processes for each of those segments, the same analysis can be applied to external customers of the organization. So, yeah, we have a definite part in that. How about clarifying the current and desired customer behavior? Well, by studying behavioral data of existing and potential customers, we can then segment based on those nuances. We might have purchases that are habitual, requiring little conscious engagement, and also those that would require a lot. And again, the experience gained by evaluating and analyzing the internal business processes and those who perform those processes will be invaluable in terms of assessing the various customer segments. And that is something that we as business analysts do all the time. How about the multi-party data to create our personas. There are three key sources of data: first, second, and third party. The first party data collection is collected and owned by the company. Second part is effectively first party data from an external source, and third party is externally sourced data that was generated for some other reason. Combining one or more of these sources will give you invaluable information. A principle of business analysis is to make sure that all conclusions and deductions, for example, requirements to produce a solution, are based on input from multiple sources, not just one. The business analyst is experienced in gathering information from multiple sources and therefore would fit in well here. How about that customer journey stuff? You say, well, I don't deal with customers really. My customers are accounts receivable or a lockbox or annuities or manufacturing. Behavioral analytics will help you understand the entire process, the entire journey. Defining a customer journey and the activities that make up that journey are more like business processes, which are things that business analysts do all the time. In fact, that's your primary business, is to examine the business processes of the organization to make them better, faster, easier. So we know customer journeys, even if we don't call them that, and we work only with internal business processes. Prototype, test, and evaluate. Well, yeah, we can generate a number of different hypotheses using behavioral analytics, more so than we can even with predictive analytics. And let's face it, we're business analysts. We know that we have to generate more than one solution to any business problem. And therefore, we know all about iteration, working in Agile, running pilot programs. We know how to set up a pilot program to test whether the solution will not work or not. And if it doesn't, go to the next solution, especially in a prototyping environment. So once again, we're right there with the behavioral analytics. And finally, apply behavioral analytics to the pilot campaign. Now, a good example of this is Kraft. Last year, they wanted to remove the artificial colors and preservatives from the popular macaroni and cheese product that it has, which sells like crazy, and particularly in these days of working from home. Now, it knew that its audience, the Kraft company knew that the people who buy macaroni and cheese are averse to change, and it did not want to come out with a new Coke fiasco. Change its product and find everybody saying, no, we like the taste of the old one, give us the old one back. Which is what happened with New Coke back in the days that maybe before your time. So after analyzing customers' product knowledge and finding out how they felt about a change through pilot tests and focus groups, Kraft quietly rolled out the updated product to give consumers time to adapt. Based on the consumer's behavior of the tests, they were able to determine that they should wait several months before starting even to run advertisements saying that, hey, we got new, improved, better for you ingredients, based on piloting with behavioral analytics. And this is something, of course, the business analyst is very familiar with. So what are the types of business?
Hi, Steve, just a quick time check. And for those in our audience, we will stay a few minutes over and get to as many questions as we can.
Okay, so these are the, thank you, Tracy. I get wrapped up in this and just going like crazy here. So these are some of the tools. We have e-commerce and retail that are clearly using it, and online gaming uses a lot of business analytics. Application development, business figure out how to develop an app to forecast future trends. Cohort analysis, cohort is those clusters that I mentioned, breaking users into similar groups. Sentiment analysis that we talked about, and security and cybersecurity. And here are some of the examples of actionable items. We can optimize behavior. We can diagnose and remove friction-heavy steps, something that we would like to do for internal people as well. Focus on key behaviors that result in higher customer value. determine what they're going to do based on their current behavior, proactively isolate and target users to reduce the rate of churn. Now, behavioral analytics is also used in security. Intrusion and protection systems have been around a long time, and now we're adding behavioral analytics to tell us when something, a pattern is starting to exist. Fraud detection, being able to tell that, hey, Steve, I have a charge on Monday to your account located in Florida, and we know that's where you live. And I also had a charge on Tuesday in San Francisco. Was that you? That doesn't seem to be your normal behavior. Most of fraud analytics, which is getting better and better today, is based on behavioral analytics. We could also, and this is going to spook you a little bit because it's kind of controversial. There is I couldn't tell who is typing on a keyboard based on how you type. We all type differently. Press harder, softer, more time between this letter and that letter. Always make the wrong spelling and words because one finger goes before the other. We all have a almost unique identifiable pattern to the way we enter things on the keyboard. This is not yet on the phones, just keyboards. So if we could look at the way you're keying, it's not really to identify who you are and what you're doing, but rather to detect a change in the way you're doing it. Just as your voice might change or your posture might change if something is happening, positive or negative, your keystrokes, how you type, will change. And this can be detected. And through behavioral analytics, we can highlight the potential that someone's behavior is showing embezzlement, collusion, or some other nefarious internal activity. This will be combined with things like machine learning. Imagine we have the streaming video showing things happening, and right now they're primarily used for after the fact. The crime is committed, let's see who did it. Let's see if we can catch the person afterwards. Wouldn't it be nice using behavior analytics to identify anomalies in behavior before the crime happens? There is a potential shoplifting going on in aisle 3. Now that doesn't mean you're going to go down and arrest somebody, because a false positive could be very detrimental, but it's certainly going to keep your eye on the person. This is called user behavior analytics, user and entity behavioral analytics, and is a brand new thing in security. The challenges are privacy. Most of you don't mind too much having your voice checked and your even facial recognition, but when we start looking at your behavior, people really start freaking out. I don't want you to know what I'm thinking, what I'm doing. I don't want you to know that by my behavior I'm doing something bad. I don't want to be psychoanalyzed as I work. We also have the embedded biases that I mentioned earlier. We also have this basic thing in behaviors which we're dealing with, and it's going to take a long time. We don't really know why we do the things we do, much less why somebody else does it. We're not 100% sure all the time of even what we're going to do next. And of course, as a result, this is still a fledgling discipline, and therefore it needs human control and oversight. And who better to provide the human control and oversight but someone that has the business savvy, technically cognizant, objective stance of the business analyst. So how do you fit in? In the end, any organization bringing business analytics in is going to need the services of a BA. First and foremost, you will be defining the problem, just what you do all the time. Your primary job is to define the problem. You'll be asking the questions to form the business analytics. You'll be determining or help to determine what data and whether it's reliable and where the data comes from and how correct it is. And then on the other side, you'll be validating, does this actually solve the problem or answer the question? What are the actionable insights that we can derive from this results of business analytics. Keeping in mind that business analytics, just like every other form of analytics, is all about decision-making and action-taking, and that's the center of the business analyst's job and world. And now we can bring Tracy back for a few minutes of questions.
Excellent. Thanks, Steve. And thanks for those that have submitted questions. You can still type questions into the questions box of the control panel. Steve will try and get through as many as possible in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Our first question, where do you draw the line on behavioral analytics invading into human privacy?
Now,
Or is there?
I'm assuming that you here doesn't mean me personally, where I draw the line, but you in general. And the answer is, we don't know. It's still, we aren't even sure where to draw the line on privacy. That's still arguing, and we have different privacy policies from different companies, and what constitutes privacy and public speech. So it's going to be difficult. But as we get better at business, at behavioral analytics and the rest of the analytics family, we're going to be defining that line. Now, I don't believe, at least in my lifetime, that there's going to be a hard and fast line, that anyone's going to be able to come out and say, on this side of the line, you're okay, on that side of the line, it's private. There's still going to be, cases going to court constantly. But right now, there is no answer to that. If you feel your privacy is being invaded, it probably is. But remember that that's the refuge of criminals too, right? They're doing something wrong and they claim that you're invading my privacy by coming in and finding $30 million of counterfeit bills in my basement.
Thanks, Steve. Our next question, how behavioral analytics will transform the financial services? And do you have any examples of that, behavioral analytics transforming the financial services?
Let me give you a behavior that is transforming the financial services today. And I mean, not 2021, but today, this very day. Using Reddit and other mass groups, you have a bunch of big firms in Wall Street that are making millions of dollars by selling short. And they sell short against companies. And the company here that's going on right now is a company called GameStop, I believe it's called. It's a store that sells games and stuff in malls, and they're not doing very well. They're basically failing, and so the short sellers assume that the company's going to go down. And a couple other similar companies, Bed Bath & Beyond is another one, BlackBerry is another one. So that's what Wall Street says. So this group of investors, retail investors they're called, are buying stocks in these companies through Robinhood and other online fee-free devices. You can buy stocks without having to pay a fee. And they're buying massive amounts of GameStop and Bed Bath & Beyond and BlackBerry, and the prices of the stocks are going way up, 162% in a day. GameStop, they had to cease trading several times because it was too volatile. As a result, those companies who were short selling on Wall Street, thinking, hey, we're the financial experts, suddenly found themselves with massive losses and are in trouble right now, borrowing money from other companies to cover their losses. That's behavior that nobody expected. Now that we know that behavior exists, we can probably model it and predict in the future what stocks might likely be in the sights of these kind of maverick traders out there who are doing it and to a certain degree, just to thumb their nose at Wall Street.
Oh my, thanks, Steve. Our next question, I think this will be our last. What is Microsoft going to use to determine a person's mood in the future, and will that be related to our cell phones, please?
Okay, last question first. Yes, it will be related to however you participate in Microsoft Teams this is. Zoom will be doing similar things as well. I don't know about Google and some of the other ones. What they're doing is using forensic linguistics. So you type something in, or you verbally, is what they're looking at, verbally say something. And by looking at the pattern of your voice, people will say certain words when they're angry. And I'm not talking just about swear words, which obviously, if you use a swear word, that usually has a certain impact. And you can usually tell if a person who never swears then suddenly uses a swear word, they're probably upset. We could even tell that without needing to see them. So, but we can go much further with this, the forensic linguistics, by putting phrases together that typically, and in English, mean the person is angry. Also, if it's verbally, as I'm doing now, the person might make all of the syllables hard. Now, you heard me saying that by chopping the words off. It sounds probably, you hear that, and if you thought about it, it sounds like I'm being angry or making a point. The Microsoft Teams could pick up and say, this person is upset about something. They're trying to make a point, and it's not just a common point. They're being emphatic about the point they're making. By the way they're pronouncing the words, over-pronouncing, if you will. The space between the words. Obviously, the tone of voice. If I raise my voice or I lower my voice. A high voice versus a low voice. All of that, particularly the voice range that you have, is stuff we've known for a long time. In fact, it's how you can persuade people to do things, by modulating your voice. But adding that to the forensic linguistics and other patterns, we can get a reasonably sure read on what your emotion is right now. Especially if this is the 174th time you've been on Teams in a meeting. We've got all those 173 times before to compare against. So if you're talking faster than you usually talk, you're probably excited about something. If you're talking slower, you're probably being condescending because you think you won't understand. And that is how Microsoft is able to tell what emotions you have.
Thank you, Steve. What a great presentation. You have a lot of lovely comments. Again, we'd like to thank Steve for presenting today for us. We'd also like to thank everyone for attending today's Modern Analyst webinar. I'd like to remind everyone that today's webinar, along with the slides, will be archived at the ModernAnalyst.com website within 2 business days. This concludes today's event. We hope everyone has a great day. And again, you can, Steve, thank you for presenting. You can see his contact information on the contact slide. And we hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you all. Have a great weekend.